Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, New Upgrade Options for Microsoft Dynamics NAV, brought to you by ArcherPoint. Today's webinar will be presented by John Long, Director of ArcherPoint Upgrades, and David Kopp, Senior Upgrade Advisor. John has been with ArcherPoint 9 years and heads up the ArcherPoint team focused on perfecting the art of upgrading Dynamics 365 to Dynamics 365 Business Central from Dynamics NAV and Navision ERP systems. David has been in the NAV world since 2005, specializing in upgrade best practices and procedures, and has been instrumental in innovating the tools and processes ArcherPoint uses in upgrades with our clients. In today's webinar, John and David will discuss the release of Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central and how it changes the course of any organization's upgrade strategy. They'll cover events, extensions, and the many deployment options now available to you. They'll help you understand the latest technology, how it can drastically improve future upgrades in terms of ease, cost, and disruption, plus how to align your strategy with Microsoft's roadmap. We'll get started with David Kopp. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. So if any of you attended NAVUG Summit, this is very similar to our presentation there, but we've gotten a lot of good feedback, so we thought we would again represent this session for any of you attending here today that were not able to attend that session, and to anybody that just missed the session. I think the really key thing that we would like for all of you attending today to take away from this is, what does the future of upgrades look like with the changing architecture and terminology of Navision to Business Central, and what opportunities does that present to you as the clients going forward? And it's a really good opportunity going forward. It's really exciting. We have a lot of good things to tell you about in this presentation. So what will you learn today as far as the session objectives? The first thing about that is to fully understand the future roadmap of Business Central and NAV using events and extensions. Also fully understand how the new Microsoft architecture will help you as the client achieve upgrades with less cost and less disruption. So that's a key takeaway from today. Also, this will help you decide on how you want to pursue your next upgrade and what options are available to you using the new architecture. So we're going to cover all of those three key aspects. All right, next slide. Let's see. A good thing to recap when we're talking about the future of upgrades is, where have we come from? You know, what have been kind of the leaps and bounds we have gone through with the NAV architecture? So all of you probably remember old classic NAV before RTC. You probably remember the Seaside database before the conversion to SQL databases. The RTC conversion, where we converted to a 3-tier architecture, or pages that replaced the old forms, the XML ports, which replaced data ports, and the RDLC reports. So this is in the roadmap of NAV, the next big jump or the next big evolution, events and extensions. And the key takeaway here, you can go ahead and switch to the next slide, is the key takeaway on this is Microsoft, in their kind of looking forward to the future, has decided what is needed for this next architecture leap. And really a big primary takeaway for this was the focus on upgrades. Because upgrades now, if you are several versions past, can be pretty costly and time consuming. So they focused on an architecture shift which will help you as the client to upgrade easier in the future. So it's really the hope out of this message is that you will actually be able to do upgrades faster and cheaper in the future versions of NAV. So obviously, by saying that, what impact does it have on my upgrades? Well, obviously it's going to reduce cost, it's going to reduce disruption, because the amount of retooling and the amount of retesting, the duration between your upgrades will grow much smaller because as the cost goes down and the disruption of retesting and replanning goes down, you'll actually be able to do more upgrades much more frequently. I'd like to think of it as though, the ultimate goal is for it to be like a Windows upgrade experience where you can actually upgrade to the newest version of the OS and you're done and everything still mostly works. Without, you got to do a little retesting, but it's like that being that easy. The risk to the mods between versions, we'll take a look at that, and also the flexibility, customizability, I'd like to say, versus upgradability. So that has always been the trade-off with this next architecture leap, which Microsoft focused on, which is why we have events and extensions now. Okay, go ahead and next slide. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is an event? So if you have not caught on yet, this is part of the big architecture shift. What is an event? So simply put, an event is a custom object, like a code unit, that replaces your ability to make a modification or a customization in a nav base object or an ISV object. So what it does is we extricate that mod out of the nav base object, put it into a custom object, and allow that custom object to subscribe back to the Navision base object so it will run in tandem with the base object. So essentially, it's the process of taking the mods out of the nav base object and putting them in a custom object. Okay, next slide. So what does this mean to me? Why should I even care about events for upgrades? Well, the most costly aspect of upgrades is your object merge. It's bringing those mods forward in nav-based objects from older versions of nav to the newer versions of nav. So the key is, if we reduce that object merge step, which really is the most costly step of an upgrade, where we do the object merging, where we may have to reapply some mods to some reports. It's the whole task of object merging those mods forward that really generates most of the cost of an upgrade. So if we reduce and or eliminate that step, then we greatly reduce the risk of those mods getting incorrectly merged or lost. We greatly increase the speed of the upgrade because we're just not doing the object merge anymore. And then we greatly reduce the major cost of the upgrades because there is no object merging. So that's why if you take out object merging, you're going to see the costs start plummeting. Next slide. So what does that mean for me? Well, what happens after events? So all of the evented code eventually will transition from a cal to an al base. And that's a very technical term. The newer versions of nav use a slightly different code base, although it looks and feels very similar to cal. So part of this transition to events is allows us to move that code from the older code base to the newer code base, which is AL. The reason to use the AL code base is hopefully we'll get a lot more people in the development community that can code in the AL code base versus cal. So it actually does help us to get into a code base that more people are familiar with. So all the transitioned evented code in AL will form extensions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There will not be any code merging of mods at that point. Once you're fully evented, the only thing that we'll have to work on are compile issues. So that should be way, way reduced from the whole object merging task. We'll definitely have to fix some compile issues, but we're not having to do the object merging. This also does assume, there is a caveat here, it assumes that all the ISV add-ons are also fully evented and extension-based in the future. Now, we are seeing significant progress in that area. We already know there are certain add-ons out there that are fully evented and extended, but that will be an ongoing challenge over the next couple of years to see that continue. Go ahead and next slide. So, what are extensions and why should I care? So here's where people start getting terminology mixed up. So they kind of commingle the words events and extensions. And although they are married together, they are separate people. So extensions are packages of evented AL code that layer on top of Business Central and Nav like layers of an onion. So it's kind of like when you have your smartphone and you're running either Apple iOS or Android from Google, you load in all of these apps on top of that operating system. So extensions are essentially packages of code that form an app. A lot of people refer to them as a packaged extension. Looks a lot like an app. So if you have 50 custom objects that have been, evented, those are your evented objects, they will package together and form an extension that layers on top of nav. And it's kind of like a packaging methodology is really all extensions amounts to. It sits on top of nav like a downloadable app. It does interact with nav, but it doesn't have any mods sitting inside of the nav base objects. The reason for this is extensions are much easier to layer onto nav without having to do code merges. You just simply load in the app and it combines its integration points into nav automatically. Next slide. So what are the future benefits of events and extensions? Well, obviously, I can't say it enough. Sometimes you have to repeat a point about 400 times for it to sink in. No more object merges. That is the costly upgrade task. You will be able to upgrade more often. It will require much less retesting and troubleshooting to upgrade. I've seen that go in half by the next upgrade and then down by another 25% the following. So it definitely plummets off the cliff, the cost and time. We can update the ISV add-ons much easier when we're fully evented and fully extended, because they too will function much like an app where we layer them on top of the nav base like a layer of an onion. So we just load them in and set them up and should run. Go ahead, next slide. So what are your next steps to an upgrade? Well, so here's where you need to consider where you're at and where you need to go. So you need to at least scope an upgrade to Business Central on premises or NAV 2018. The reason for that, for one of those two versions, is it will give you the most access to published events from Microsoft and allow the client to change the mods over to events much more easily. If you're not fully using events, this will allow you as the client to morph over to that architecture, which you really can't do as well in the older versions of NAV. There just is not as much published events in the older versions prior to 2018. So that's why you really need to kind of wrap your head around to getting to at least 2018 as a minimum, but Business Central is preferable as long as all the ISVs that you need are published for that version. So if all the ISVs are published, whether or not they're fully evented yet, if they're at least all published for Business Central, definitely go to that version. Absolutely go to that version. If they're not published to that version yet, then you can at least go to 2018 and start working on the eventing conversion to get you set up for your next upgrade a lot better. The ISV add-ons do need to publish their add-ons as fully evented at least, and possibly as full extensions, but it's that getting to fully evented that will help you transition really well along the road down to this next architecture leap. All right, next slide. All right, so what upgrade option kind of roadmaps exist? Well, so there's really kind of two major roadmaps that we see right now. Once you're upgrading to at least Business Central or 2018, you can accomplish this one of two ways. You can either merge all the mods forward as they are without any eventing to the latest version of NAV, to one of those two I mentioned right above, and then performing an eventing project after the upgrade is kind of like a phase 2 of the upgrade, and test those retooled mods out after the upgrade. Or you can actually incorporate either partial or full eventing into your upgrade project. So as much eventing as is humanly possible, you can actually incorporate that into your next upgrade project. So the upside of that means that you probably have to retest less as a whole because you're kind of bundling it all together. If you did them as separate projects, you'd test kind of point A to point B without retooling, and then you can retest separately the whole eventing aspect of moving your mods out of the base. So there's some good pros and cons of each. We tend to find that if clients are embracing the eventing, that they're at least willing to do what we call partial eventing in the first upgrade, because that gets them further along the roadmap to full eventing at least, and makes even the next upgrade cycle for them much less complicated. So if you can wrap your mind around it, it actually is a good thing to consider doing at least partial eventing during your very next upgrade project. All right, go ahead and next slide. So what are the exceptions to full eventing? Well, I've kind of alluded to them already. One of the main ones is if an ISV add-on is not fully evented right now, then the client mods tied to or inside that add-on code, even if it's stuck in a nav base object, cannot be really appropriately evented yet. And the reason for that is the ISV is going to have to eventually fully event and fully extend their product. So until they do, it just represents kind of double rework for you to have to event something that the ISV has to change eventually anyway. So our strategy is event everything tied to nav base, any mods tied to your nav base without an add-on. But if there's something that an add-on provider is still, stuck inside a nav base object, and you have a custom stuck inside that ISV section, you just need to wait for that ISV to be fully evented or extended, and then finish out your eventing once they do that. So the other exception to that would be if base nav doesn't have a feature to support that particular mod, you may have to wait for a few mods to fully event them until later. Microsoft is adding constantly new functionality and features to support essentially getting you to full eventing, either now or in the future. So there might be a few mods that you can't fully event right now, but if you get 90% down that road, you can still realize a lot of benefit, because then your very next upgrade, if you've evented 90%, that means that cost of those items for the next upgrade will be very cheap to upgrade because they've been fully evented. So even if you have 5-10% you can't event, that's not a problem, because the next upgrade at least gets you where you need to go much better. All right, next slide. All right, so what options does this present? Well, obviously you need to have a conversation with your VAR about some type of maybe subscription service or kind of roadmap planning. We call it a subscription service. Other VARs might call it something different. It's kind of a roadmap that plans out what your next upgrade or series of upgrades looks like and helps you budget and forecast that cost. One thing that we try to do at ArcherPoint is really help our clients forecast out in a fixed cost way what the upgrade services look like for them over the next 3 or more years. So we can actually forecast out into the future at least 3 years what that cost will look like, and give it to them at a fixed price and discount off some of the eventing costs as long as they sign up for kind of the roadmap for that 3-year period. So you definitely have to have a conversation about that. If ArcherPoint is your VAR, then we're the group you want to talk to about that. Upgrades as a subscription service allows you to take advantage of the latest versions of nav. So if you think about as you've signed up for any product that, I have a smartphone and shoot, I get regular updates to fix things with my operating system, with my Apple phone or my Android phone. And that service that I have constantly allows me to get updates pushed and fed to me. There are other paid services out there like that, for subscriptions. And our service is very much like that. We like to give you a roadmap. We like to give you a plan of what the next 3 or more years looks like and give you the ability to plan that for budget purposes. And we think doing it as a subscription service allows you to take advantage of looking at the plan over a longer period of time without having to keep going back to the well to get budget approval. So for us, our terminology of using subscription upgrades shows you the roadmap and shows you the leveled out costs, incorporating some fixed cost into that to show you, yes, I can actually plan on this budget over this period of time, these 3 or more years. Next slide. All right, this is where I will turn it over to John Long, and he has the rest of the presentation. So take it away, John.
Hello. Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to probably duplicate some of the things that Dave said, but I'm going to distill it into perhaps less comprehensive, less detail. And I'm going to start kind of at the top. What are we upgrading to? We're upgrading to Business Central. Now there's 4 different options of Business Central, and the top one is the peak of Microsoft's what they're offering. That's the Microsoft hosted cloud solution of Business Central. That's the ultimate pinnacle of where Microsoft's technology has taken us in the ERP arena. Option 2 is Business Central Azure. That's essentially Business Central on-prem. You've probably heard of that. It'll essentially is the on-prem version of Business Central, but it's in an Azure environment. Option 3 is also Business Central, but it's hosted in a kind of a virtual cloud server that you would rent. Option 4 is Business Central on premises, actually on premises. So that would be at your facility with an air-controlled room and yada, yada, yada. So those are the 4 options that we have. And just to illustrate my point about the 2 different versions, on-prem and in the cloud, the Dynamics 365 hosted SaaS on the left, software as a service, is the pinnacle, and then all the other 3 are on-prem. So the 2 in the middle, on-prem on Azure and on-prem in a virtual server in the cloud, are essentially on-prem in the cloud, as ironic as that sounds. The only one that's actually on-prem is the version on the far right. And so now I'm just going to talk a little bit about how to upgrade to the cloud from Business Central on-prem, and in a minute it'll all make sense why. But Microsoft has given us a way to upgrade since Summit last month with the extension that came out with the on-prem version called Intelligent Cloud Management. So if you just go to a search box in Business Central on-prem, it'll type in Intel, you'll see one option, Intelligent Cloud Management. And this will take you to a screen that manages replication. It's table level and field level replication. It takes your data from on-prem, once you click that Run Replication Now button, and pushes it into the cloud. And at the end of the replication process, you'll essentially have an exact copy of your database in the cloud hosted by Microsoft. If you do it with a really small database, it might take 8 hours. If you do it with a 1.5 terabyte database, it might take 6 months. But at the end of that period, you can shut off your on-prem version and point your web clients to the cloud URL, and you'll be live. So the upgrade in the future is literally a one-click button, and lots of crossing your fingers to hope that the replication completes at some point. So the ramifications to replication, is that both databases need to be sharing the same schema. So you're probably wondering what happens, if we don't do a code freeze and developers making customizations, making changes to tables. Well, the replication is smart enough to not break. It gives you a log showing you what data can't be replicated because of a schema change. Then it gives you a chance to kind of sync up the schema at some point. Typically, when you're in that area where you have an on-prem version and in the cloud version, you'll make your releases of your customizations to the on-prem version at the same time that you do for the cloud version, and you won't have that problem. Replication might take days, weeks, or months, and when that delta is essentially the replication gets down to the delta of the daily transactions or even the hourly transactions, that's when you can start talking about going live. So the biggest, I guess, epiphany from this information is that you will have to go live on-prem. It's almost an inevitability with any database of any size. So keep that in mind. And then if you think back on those last slides where I showed you the different options of on-prem and the cloud, and you're coming from an older version like 5.0, and you don't want to buy a bunch of new computers and fill up your room with new computers just to go live on-prem, you can consider those other options of an on-prem version in the cloud and take advantage of the rental and subscription models that exist for the on-prem version in the cloud. If you're planning on going to Business Central in the cloud in a kind of a long-term strategy, then it might make sense to purchase new computers and camp out in Business Central on-prem for years even. I like analogies, so I'm going to create an analogy to kind of give you an idea and kind of tie everything in a bow that Dave talked about in a simple illustration of what it takes to get from Business Central on-prem to the cloud. So I made this analogy of Everest, and at the bottom, I hope you can see Basecamp on your screens. Basecamp is Business Central on-prem. So if you consider Business Central as like in Everest, Basecamp as the bottom of the top of the world, Basecamp is the bottom of the top of Microsoft's ERP vision. It's where you need to go to prepare to get to the summit. And I'll just pound this analogy into your brains a little bit more by showing you what I mean. So Dynamics 365 Business Central is your Basecamp. It's the on-prem version of NAV or Business Central. And Business Central SaaS is fully in the cloud. And so I'm making the analogy of the summit of Everest. So Basecamp, just like in Everest, is where you prepare for the top. You wait for the weather to be perfect. You order new supplies from your Sherpas. You perhaps get your oxygen tanks filled up. We might do some sample or testing the water, so to speak, climbing up to Basecamp 1, coming back down to Basecamp and re-provisioning your supplies, etc. So if you think of Basecamp and all the things that you have to do that Dave talked about, eventing, decoupling your code, extensions, Basecamp is where you do that. It's where you do all your preparation to get to the cloud. And even if you don't go to the cloud for years, it will still give you all the benefits of easily, cheaply upgrading your database. even if you don't take advantage of the cloud. But at some point, Microsoft's going to make it a mandatory step. So it behooves everyone to get to Basecamp and start preparing and acclimating themselves to the altitude, so to speak. Basecamp is where you wait for your ISVs to release extensions. And that's a big one. That's probably the only technical hurdle that customers and partners have that are outside of their control. We can't do anything about it. If an ISV does not have their release and extension, there's no way to take advantage of Microsoft's technology for easily upgradable code. For instance, you'll if you have customizations on those ISVs, which most customers do, it's inevitable. You will have to merge your code. And then finally you move your customizations to extensions. Dave talked about eventing. That's essentially decoupling your code to prepare for the extensions. And then once all your customizations are on extensions, your ISVs are on extensions, your customizations to ISVs are on extensions, then you can hit the replicate button, or not. You could, like I said, you can sit at Basecamp and do all that preparation. But once you're ready to go to the cloud, you just hit that replication button and wait, and then you're ready to go live on Business Central SaaS in the cloud. So just to review, upgrading to on-prem Business Central is a necessary step to think about before going to the cloud, or literally your next upgrade will be to Business Central on-prem. There's no reason to wait. There's no reason to sit on 2018. Just go straight to Business Central on-prem. And if you're considering going to the cloud, you still need to go through this on-prem. That's why I think of it as Basecamp. Get to Basecamp, acclimate, and then talk about the cloud. So this is where you do your events, your extensions. You abandon your desktop client, even though they will give you the option to use it. The web client is the only client in the cloud, and it's slowly being, I wouldn't say not supported, but Microsoft is spending all of their energy on increasing the value add and the quality of the web client. Even in 2018, it's in some ways superior to the desktop client. So in Business Central on-prem, my advice is to use the web client just so you can get your users used to it. And it comes for free out of the box. Evaluating dependencies, that's kind of a task that you do in every upgrade, but when you're moving to SaaS, it's especially important because your external interfaces are not going to be as in control as they are when you have a SQL Server database, for instance, on-prem. So those are definitely concerns that you need to think about. And finally, replicate to SaaS. And now I'll open it up for questions.
Hey, thank you both very much. We do have some questions that came in. So we'll just start at the top. First question came in from one of our attendees asking if the LANM add-ons of eShip, eReceive, etc. Already work with either Business Central or NAV 2018.
So yes, all LANM add-ons definitely work with 2018 and or Business Central. They are in the process of still eventing some of those, but you can at least upgrade to 2018 and or Business Central and at least get further along in the roadmap to be fully eventing. So even if they're not fully evented, you can actually event other parts of your code base that are not tied to that add-on, even if LANM is or isn't ready fully. So I would suggest if you're thinking about it, it at least gets you much further down the road in preparation for any remaining ISV providers that are still finishing out their fully eventing or fully extensions. I know that ChargeLogic is fully evented and fully extended. I believe Lanham is still in the process of completing that task.
And I think that once they are, then that they should be made available on AppSource, correct?
Yes, and we would be able to tell you that once you did an upgrade with us. But right now, you can still go to 2018 or Business Central right now and start down that road, even if that one add-on is not ready yet. You can still do other eventing that's not tied to the add-on.
All right, thanks. I've got quite a few questions coming in now. So the next one is from Matt. He wants to know what's the biggest advantage? I believe he had two questions here. But why would you have a hybrid setup?
So,
well, yeah, like hybrid meaning partially extension and
on-prem, I'm not sure.
I mean, I know where he's probably asking that question. So, if you're talking about a hybrid where you're partially evented and maybe partially not, the upside, even if you're only halfway evented, you do not have to actually package your events as extensions right away, even if you're, let's say, 50% evented. The upside, though, is if you at least get further down the road now, as opposed to waiting until later, the next upgrade you have after this, all that you did to do at least maybe 50% eventing cuts down on the next object merge task for the next upgrade.
Got it.
At least gets you further along, and immediately on all the stuff you've already evented helps you reduce your object merge costs for any future upgrade beyond that.
And great, and thanks for that reiteration. And actually, he was talking about why would you have a hybrid setup on-prem and cloud, right? So that type of hybrid setup.
Yeah. Go ahead,
so
John.
you could have an Azure database in the cloud, and rumor has it that the only benefit of that, besides having the flexibility of throttling your rental by the hour, literally, so there might be some cost savings, would be that, and this is a rumor, that going from an Azure database hosted by Microsoft in the cloud to Business Central hosted in the cloud, I guess is much faster than coming from a brick and mortar SQL Server database.
Got it. He also asked, and while we're speaking about that, he noted that Azure SQL seems to be slow on other smaller databases. I don't know if you guys have experience with that, or any other comments on that.
I've heard both comments. I've heard it's fast. I've heard it's slow. And in cases where it's slow, I haven't done enough research to just blanket blame it on the technology. It's usually something else, like usually when you do an upgrade, there's so many moving pieces that you don't actually know what causes a performance issue. But I am highly skeptical that Azure has any type of performance issues. Microsoft is just spending an enormous amount of resources on that technology. So I'm always skeptical to blame the technology, especially with Azure.
And then Dave would like to know, how many times have we gone through the steps at this point from Basecamp to the summit?
Since the on-prem version got recently released, we're in the throes of doing a lot of people in Basecamp right now. So we're in the throes of, many of our clients are now going to Basecamp, Business Central on-prem, and doing the eventing projects. So we're in the midst of several right as we speak.
But with respect to the summit, we are still waiting on ISVs, right? Ourselves too.
Yeah, the crux is some of the ones that we've encountered do have ISVs that are not quite fully evented yet. So that does present a little bit of a hurdle because we need them fully evented before everything in their database, any mods can be fully evented and then packaged as extensions. So yes, you got to have those ducks in a row and checked off the boxes before you can do that final step.
Next question, has Microsoft released a timeline where all customers can no longer be on-premise?
I do not know that that has been released, and that is probably one that will go through iterations of will they enforce that or not. I do know I've heard some clients raise objection of, just because of security issues or industries that they're in where they cannot host it somewhere else.
Yeah,
They have
compliance issues. Maybe an issue, maybe a problem for them to draw that
host.
line in the sand.
Oh yeah. So I'm not sure that that will be I have not seen a timeline where they would enforce that, and I'm guessing there might be pushback on it.
Next
Yeah, and
question. Go ahead.
I would just also say that, version 2 of Navision is still active in some companies, believe it or not.
Yes, it is.
So even if Microsoft stops upgrading it or supporting it, that doesn't mean that you have to move to the cloud on that day.
People are still going to use it.
Yeah.
Next question, do Jet Reports work with NAV 2018?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they're on AppSource, I believe, as well. So they're fully extended, correct?
I do not know that answer to that question, but I know that published for 2018, and that the beauty of Jet is they don't actually have objects for the newer versions of Nav inside the database, so it kind of renders that a moot point because they're not actually touching base objects. So even if they have an extension or they don't, all their newer versions don't touch Nav base anyway. So it's kind of a moot point. They could publish it as an extension or whatever, and it's already not an issue.
So another comment here from a client that has a 350 gig database, econ configurator, and others, and the cost of the SAS is crazy for that size and complexity of a database. Any comments on that?
I don't think it's expensive relative to, I've seen cost analysis, and off the top of my head, it's too difficult of a subject to get into to break down all the costs, but there are some pretty good articles out there talking about the costs relative to housing it brick and mortar style, including the cost of electricity.
Yeah, the space, the servers, and all that, right, John?
Yeah, I've heard the opposite. I've heard that the subscription model for Business Central in the cloud and even Azure databases in the long run is cheaper, and I realize it's a debatable topic, and there's tons of videos out there that debate it, but.
So Matt, you're welcome to reach out afterwards if you'd like. We do have some people that focus on Azure and different configurations that might be beneficial if you want to offload, and that would be one of those cases where there might make sense to do a hybrid of cloud versus on premises. Happy to take a look at that again. I don't know when you last costed it, but there has been pricing changes over the course of since they rolled out Azure. So
I do know
might be worth taking another look at.
Yeah, I do know that they don't bill you for the size of your database.
It's transaction based, right?
I don't even think it's transaction based. I think it's user based and perhaps memory, but it's not the size of the database.
Okay.
But of course, the size of your database, the size of your database will have a factor only in the replication part. So if it takes 3 months, of course, you're going to be paying 3 months for renting Microsoft's hosted, server while the replication is going on.
Next question is, if we have mods to an ISV solution, will their solution have their own events that we can subscribe to replace our mods to the ISV?
So the hope is that yes, they will start publishing some events, but we can also, through your partner, request certain things be added to an ISV add-on as far as published events, if it makes sense. So there's always the ability to make those requests of the ISV, so that it makes it easier to attach your mods to their add-on. So I know as add-ons continue to morph over to this architecture, they will continue to get requests from VARs and clients about, okay, hey, we keep seeing this repeating pattern here. It might be easier if you just publish an event to attach. And I'm sure that's going to happen because it obviously happened with NAV base as well. You got people saying, oh, okay, this one area over here is really deficient on published events, so we need you to throw another 50 events in this particular area. And NAV has continued to do that over the last several years.
Great. We have a scenario. Let's say upgrade hours run from 200 to 300 hours, depending on mods and size of the database. We are expecting less than 100 hours or so, trying to get a basic rotation. Sorry, I think it was cut out. Upgrade hours.
Just as a general metric, I've seen our clients that do at least half of their eventing in the first upgrade project, and they, let's say, were on 2009 and going to either 2018 or Business Central on Prem. I've seen the next upgrade after that, the cost of that typically can cut by as much as half. Now, if they're on 2018 or 2017 going to 2018, that cost won't be as a significant a drop between the first upgrade you attempt and the second. It will still go down, but it is a pretty precipitous drop. If it's a larger jump and you combine eventing with it, I've seen those drop off as much as maybe half. Sometimes they're maybe 25% drop, but I've seen a lot of them, if they're much older versions, start dropping off by half. So yeah, it's quite large. And then beyond that, once you're fully evented, then it drops off even further.
Yeah,
and this is, just to reiterate, this is the first architecture jump I've seen Microsoft do where there's actually a significant hope that your future upgrade costs will drop. That has never happened in the history of Microsoft because of a change in architecture. Actually, they tend to get more. And this is the first time the direction will hopefully make your upgrades drop, which is great. That's why I think everybody should be doing it now to start making the upgrades cost drop and be able to take advantage of new features way more frequently than a 3 to 5 year cycle of upgrading.
10, something like that. For some people.
Yeah, 10.
On a faster rotation, then you can actually take advantage of upgrading NAV like once a year, once every 2 years if you really wanted to.
Just to add on to that too, we are seeing the end of legacy upgrades that we've been used to for the past 33 years, and the upgrade is experience in the future is going to be so drastically different that it won't be disruptive. It won't be as expensive. It won't be an 8-month project. And the types of things that we're talking about here in quantifying what it takes to do the eventing and a strategy to do it, it's all quantifiable to a degree, and it's a one-time task. Once it's fully evented, you'll never have to event code again. So if you partially event and sit on it for a couple of years, you are asking for maybe trouble of perhaps developers will go in there and write non-eventable code, for instance. But once you're fully evented and you go to AL, you never have to do that again.
One and done. Thank you for that. I do want to make a comment. This is from one of our ArcherPoint attendees, that you do have to select the size of the database you need on Azure, but it's not pricey at all. So just a comment there. Another question, do you guys know if NAV Easy Security is working or evented for Business Central? Any information on that?
It will work with Business Central on-prem. Now, the second question is, do they have a fully evented extension version published? I do not know the answer to that question. But if you're on Business Central on-prem right now, I know for sure they have a non-extension version. I just don't know if they have a fully evented extension version.
Great, thank you. A little more research there. We'll get back to you on that, Dave. I think that is all of the questions that we have. I did have a question myself. John, when you first started your part of the presentation, you were talking about the replication to Business Central on-prem to the cloud. So what are the additional costs when you start that replication? Is that's just the Azure rental, if you will, of the cloud storage with Microsoft? Is that the only additional cost?
Microsoft's version of the new technology database. So yes, you have to sign up, get a subscription for the SaaS version of Business Central, and then when you replicate it, it communicates with that database from your on-prem version.
Right. And then I have some other questions that are really more about licensing, so maybe we'll just do another webinar on that. But for now, that wraps up our questions. Thank you all for your engagement and asking that. I hope we answered everything to your satisfaction. If not, please do reach out to us. We appreciate everyone setting aside time out of your day for this webinar. We hope you consider it time well spent. We'd love to hear your feedback, your suggestions for other topics to cover and future webinars. So please email us at info@archerpoint.com. That's info@archerpoint.com. Again, thank you all for your time today. This concludes today's session. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for watching this ArcherPoint video. If you found it helpful, make sure to check out our website and blog at www.archerpoint.com. Additionally, if you have any questions regarding our products, services, or information in this video, feel free to email us at info@archerpoint.com. Thanks.